You're listening to Rabbi Wolbe of Torch in Houston, Texas. This is the Everyday Judaism Podcast.
Welcome back, everybody. Welcome to the Everyday Judaism Podcast. We are now about 70 or 80 episodes into our work here in learning practical everyday Judaism. It is so important for us to know not what to do, but how to do it. And we're talking about the how-to in a very practical way. What do we need to do? Now, the foreword that I would like to begin with in the laws that we're about to begin Siman Lamed Vav, which is the 36th section of Halacha in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, in the abridged Code of Jewish Law. And it's interesting that today, when we go to buy chicken meat in the kosher supermarket or in the kosher department of our supermarket, everything is ready to go. You basically don't need to do any kashering. But it used to be, when my mother was in grade school, she learned, as part of the curriculum, they learned how to kosher an animal. Because what used to happen was, you couldn't go to the store and just buy chicken. You'd have to buy an actual chicken, bring it to the shaychet, to the slaughterer, and he would slaughter it for you, check it, make sure everything, and then you'd bring home the chicken. You would have to do the whole process yourself. So it was important to know. This is a very important body of Jewish law because it's essential for us to know if you're living out in New Mexico, right, Chaim Rafal? If you're living out in New Mexico and you learn how to slaughter an animal, whether it be a land animal, whether it be a beast, a cow, a deer, you're going to have to know how to salt it properly, because part of the process we're going to talk about is very important. The first thing you do, and we're going to learn through all of the laws of it, but just as a very brief summary, after an animal is slaughtered, there's a basic check depending on what type of animal it is. If it's a bird, if it's poultry, then it's a simpler process. But if it's an animal like a sheep or a goat or a cow, there's a much more extensive process of confirming that this animal was indeed kosher when it was slaughtered. What does that mean? It means that it didn't have any broken limbs. It means that it didn't have a puncture in its lungs. It didn't have any type of blemish, major blemish, that would render it unkosher. After that's done, so now you start taking apart the meat or the chicken, and now you have to kasher it. What do? The first thing is you soak it. You soak it in warm water. What happens when we have warm water? If you get a cut, if you get an injury, warm water opens up, it softens it, right? And then you salt it. You salt it, and that's going to be the next siman that we're going to learn together. You salt it, and the salt extracts all of the blood, and then you rinse it. So you're rinsing off all the blood that was extracted and the salt, and then you're ready to go. It's ready to be grilled. It's ready to be baked or cooked, or however you want to prepare your chicken. Okay, so it is prohibited to consume blood of both animals and poultry. So this is a very important thing for us to understand. The blood must be extracted. Now, just so that you know, if you go to H-E-B or you go to the kosher butcher or you go to Harova market and here in Houston, and you buy some kosher chicken or meat, you may see a little bit of blood in the packaging. That's not blood. It looks like blood. It's not blood. What they do is, in the process of preparing it, they put some fluids onto the piece of meat so that it looks a little fresher while it's in the fridge. Okay, it's already been salted. How do we know that? Because there's a kosher symbol on that meat which certifies. There's a rabbi who was there who certified, I saw it being salted in the proper way. Okay, so it's very important. Meat is not just kosher because it's from a kosher animal. Meat has to be slaughtered, it has to be soaked, it has to be salted, it has to be rinsed according to halacha, and of course, even before that process, checked to ensure that that kosher animal was indeed without blemish. and then it's suitable for our kosher tables. Okay, so the prohibition applies to any blood that has either emerged from the meat at one point or has pooled in some of the animal's blood vessels, but does not apply to blood that has been absorbed or remained absorbed in its place in the meat of the animal. In this process of cooking, blood emerges from the meat and from the blood vessels. This blood is prohibited. And if reabsorbed into the meat, can cause the meat to become prohibited. So if blood is extracted, you got to get rid of that. And we'll see in a second what goes on over here. In addition, some of the blood may become absorbed into the utensils in which the meat was cooked and cause the utensils to be prohibited for further use. Okay, so it's also a problem because if you have non-kosher chicken, what's going to happen? That non-kosher chicken is going to cause your utensils, your pot, your pan, your oven to become unkosher as well, because you're cooking non-kosher food in there. Okay. To prevent this, before cooking meat, one must extract all the blood that is absorbed within the meat. The sages determined that proper salting of meat prior to cooking, when accompanied by thorough rinsing, effectively extracts blood. Alternatively, the meat can be roasted over a fire, which also draws out the blood. These procedures, known as kashering, and the laws that are relevant to this process are outlined in this Siman. Okay? So now we begin. You had a question? Yes, there's this time frame. There is a time frame. Good question. We're going to address it shortly. Okay. In this Siman, we're going to talk about the time frame within which it needs to be salted. Okay. So just a general, once it's within past 24 hours, it's done. Okay. It's not going to be, might as well give it to McDonald's and give it to them, right? It's not going to be kosher, okay? But after 24 hours, it's done. So it's called me'es la'es, from moment to moment. From 3 o'clock, it's slaughtered, till 3 o'clock the next day, it's already done. So, because already it gets locked in. Okay, now, we'll see exactly all the details in this Siman. It might take 2 episodes to accomplish that, but I'm looking forward to this journey because it opens up our eyes and our minds to an area of halacha that's sometimes not studied. And it's important for us to gain an understanding, to gain a workable conversation in this matter. Okay, it's very important to know the basics of it. It's we're not gonna become rabbis from this process, but we will become knowledgeable Jews in the process. Okay, so kodim shemolchin es habasar, before salting the basar, tzrichim ladiach oso yafe b'mayim. It must be rinsed it must be rinsed extremely well in water. To accomplish this, one must soak it in water for approximately a half hour. And it is important that the water that the meat be completely submerged in the water. In a place where the blood is visible on the surface of the meat, it must be rubbed off with the water in which it is being soaked and remove the blood. So you got to clean it off, and then you soak it. Similarly, before salting poultry, you must clean off and rub off the area where the slaughter had taken, which is usually in the neck, not usually, always in the neck, and remove all the blood from there before you soak it. Similarly, one must rub the internal meat surfaces where there is visible blood. Sometimes there is found within meat or poultry sometimes a spot where blood is coagulated, so it's joined together. There's a whole area of blood under the flesh, like a black and blue mark, as a result of a wound. You have to puncture or cut that spot and remove all of that blood before soaking this. So any place that's visible with blood, you got to rinse it off first before you soak it. for that half hour. Kshamayim karim ma'od, when water is for the soaking is very cold, yanichem tchila b'mokem cham ktsas, one should place them first in the water that is in a slightly warmer spot. Lahafig tzinasan kodem sheshorin bohen es habasar, in order to lessen the coldness of the water before soaking it in meat. Today we have warm water readily available. It used to not be that case. You just, wherever they'd get the water from the river, from the lake, and then they'd bring it. So you got to warm it up a little, put it next to the fire so it gets a little bit warmer before you do the soaking. Key. For if this is not done, machmas hakriyus shabamayim, as a result of the coldness of the water, yiskasha habasa, the meat will harden, velo yetze achar kach hadam b'melicha, and the blood will not be extracted from the salting process. Halacha number 2, im shachachu, if they forgot to remove the meat, v'nishra habasar b'mayim me'es le'es, and the meat soaked in the water for 24 hours, habasar v'gama kli asur, the meat and the vessel that it was in. So if it was in a pot, for example, you take your big soup pot and you say, I'm going to soak it in this pot. So you take your chicken, you put it into the pot, and now it's soaking, and you forgot about it. 24 hours later, both the pot and the chicken are not kosher. They're forbidden. And liver that was soaked in water for 24 hours, you should consult with your competent Orthodox rabbi to know what to do with that. Halacha number Gimel. Be'erev Shabbos she'ein lo pnai, when on Erev Shabbos, on Friday, when one does not have enough time to soak the meat for a half hour before salting due to the impending arrival of Shabbos, where, for example, in places like New York, you can have Shabbos on an early Friday when we change the clock. They'll come in at 4 o'clock. Right? You get back from work at 12:1. It's like you don't have that time to soak it and to do that. O be'inyon asher achar she'ashar tchuka, or in a situation where you're pressured for time. It is sufficient to rub the meat thoroughly while rinsing it in water. So you put it on the warm water and you rinse it really, really well. And you soak it a shorter period of time in the water. And when there's no more redness remaining in the water, meaning you don't see that there's any more, so then you can salt it then, because you've already removed all of the accessible blood from this chicken or meat. Again, today, the kashrut agencies do the work for us. When we buy packaged meat from Aaron's, Rubashkin, or we buy it from Meal Mart, or you buy from Empire Chicken, right? These are kosher factories that slaughter and do all of the process there already. It comes packaged, ready to go. So we don't have to worry about this. So again, we're trying to just educate ourselves and become more knowledgeable in the laws of our Torah. If this is now halacha number 4, if after the soaking they cut one piece of meat into 2, then you have to rinse the place where they cut, that little spot, very well before salting it, mipnei hadam sheyesh sham, because of the blood that may be present in that area. Halacha number 5, basar shenikrash machmasakor, if the meat became frozen due to the cold, so it got tzrichim lahashgiach sheyiposher, you have to make sure that it gets thawed out before it is salted, because salting frozen meat is not going to do anything. But don't put it next to the oven, because then that's going to already cook it, and that's going to also lock it, and it's not going to allow for the salting process to do its job. In pressing situations, one may soak it in warm water, and I believe ideally it should be not cold water. It doesn't mean warm water, but it means not cold water. Halacha number 6. The vessel that is designated for the soaking of the meat, you should not use it for other food-related purposes. Okay, that dish or vessel that's used for the kashering should be used only for the kashering. Don't use it to mix your ground beef or things like that for your barbecue. Not a good idea. It's worthwhile to have a different pot or pan for that. La'achar shenishra habasar tzrichin lahatif mimenu hamayim kidei shelo yimas hamelach min hamayim v'lo yotzi es adam. After the meat is soaked, one must allow the water to drip off of it before putting the salt on the meat. So let it drip off. You put it on a like a drying rack. You let it drip off all the water and the residue of the blood that was apparent. Kidei shelo yimas hamelach min hamayim, so that the salt should not become dissolved with the remaining water. So now if you have salt is going to get dissolved right away. V'lo yotzi es adam, and then it will not serve its purpose and extract all the blood. You also have to make sure not to allow the meat to become fully dry, in order for the salt not to fall off of it. It's going to be too salt. Again, you got to make sure there's a very delicate balance of the right way in which it needs to be kashered. Okay, is this understood so far? Okay. Again, thank you Hashem that we today have manufacturing plants or slaughterhouses that do the work for us. And we have rabbis who sit there and ensure that every single piece of meat that's getting... by the way, there's a big industry of slaughterhouses in South America. And I know rabbis who would go down there for months at a time, because that's to the season that they would slaughter the animals, and they would make sure every single piece of meat, every single chicken, and in Uruguay, for example, Uruguay sends a tremendous amount of the meat that comes to the United States and to Israel is from Uruguay. So they have to have rabbis there to ensure that the entire process, from the slaughtering and shochtim as well, slaughterers, the people who actually do the slaughtering, the people who check the knives. There's a big process. We're going to talk about this in the upcoming episodes. Hamelach lo yehedak me'od kekemach. Now, anybody familiar with granulated salt, like real little salt? That's not good for this. You ever heard of kosher salt? That's good for this. That's why it's called kosher salt, because it koshers the meat. It got its name because this was I need the ones with the bigger pieces of salt, because that's able to extract the blood from the meat. So this salt that should not be very fine like flour. The imkain nimas miyad alabasar ve'eno motzi sadam, because if it's very fine, it'll immediately dissolve on the meat and will not be extracted. It will not extract any of the blood. V'gam lo yeh gasmod. It shouldn't be very coarse either. Shem yipol alabasar, because then it'll fall off the. If you have these big chunks like the ice, the ice in we don't know about this in New York, but those of you who may have visited other places where they have ice in the winter and they have the salt that they sprinkle on the ice so that people don't slip and the ice melts. So sometimes that could be. Now you have to be careful. It shouldn't be too coarse. It shouldn't be too powdery, because you want it to do its job of extracting all of the blood. For if it is too coarse, it may fall off of the meat. Ella yeh benoni. It should be average-sized crystals. Kemo hamelach shenase al yidei bishul, like salt that is formed when salt water is cooked. Yavesh sheyispazer heitev, and it should also be dry so that it should spread well on the entire piece of the meat. Now, again, what's going to happen after this? We're going to rinse it all off because it's going to extract the blood. So now in the crystals of the salt, there's going to be this blood that was extracted from the meat. And now we're going to wash it off after, so that and then it's ready to go. Okay. Halacha number 9. One must spread the salt upon the meat on all sides. That there shouldn't be a single spot of the meat that is not covered with salt. Therefore, when salting poultry, one must open the fowl really well, so that he is able to salt them from inside as well. Halacha number 10. Habasar b'molcho tzorich lahaniach b'makom sheyuchal hadam lozuv mimenu hetev. One must place the salt-covered meat in a position and in a place where the blood can drain out from it well. V'lachein, therefore, when salting meat in a basket, lo yamid esasal im habasar al gabi karka. One should not place the basket containing the meat upon the ground. Why? Because it's not gonna drain out. Ki lo yuchal hadam lozov hetev, because the blood will not be able to drain well. Va'afilu lachar shekvar shoha habasar b'milcho shir melicha, even after the meat has remained in its salt for the amount of time required for proper salting, which we'll see in the coming seif. Kodem hadacha, as long as the salt is still on it, before it has been rinsed a second time, lo yutneo b'makom she'ein hadam yachol lovzuv hetev. One should not put it in a place where the blood cannot drain well from it. Ukeshemolchen al gabe yadaf, and when the salting is done on a board, on like a cutting board, if you salt it on it, you have to put it on a slant, on an incline, so that it can drain out the blood. Kidei sheyozov heitev, so that the blood can drain well. V'shelo yebo gome sheyiskabetz bo atzir, and the board should not have grooves where the blood can pool there. V'hamoleach ofos o dofen shlema sheyesh lo toch v'beis kibul. One who is salting poultry or an entire side of an animal that has an interior that can function as a receptacle, then they have to turn the side that is hollow downward. And this is all common sense, so that it can drain out properly, the blood can drain out from the salting process. How long should it be salted for? The meat should remain salted for an hour. It is in a pressing situation, it can be only for 24 minutes. It is not ideal. It should be for the full hour. But again, when you have a short Shabbos and they're not going to be able to for whatever reason, then you can do 24 minutes. But the ideal is, again, 60 full minutes. Halacha number 12. After the meat has remained in the salt for the required amount of time, one should brush off the salt very well, and rinse the meat with water 3 times extremely well. And a woman who is God-fearing, she herself should supervise the rinsing of the meat. For sometimes, if you have a maidservant, you have a housekeeper, someone who's preparing the food for you, they carry the water on their shoulder, because they don't want to schlep so much water, so they'll skimp and not use the amount of water necessary to properly rinse off the meat. And this can result in, heaven forbid, them violating the prohibition of eating blood. It's a biblical prohibition from eating blood, and therefore you have to be very, very careful about this. And again, this is why we have today a mashgiach. Mashgiach means a supervisor who ensures that the entire process has been done properly. He doesn't have to be the one who's actually doing the salting, but he has to oversee it to ensure that there's no shortcuts being taken. And one must be very careful not to place the meat into a vessel without water before it has been rinsed from its salt, because it's going to trafe up that vessel. Okay? One must take care when salting poultry to remove the head before the soaking. And if the bird was salted with the head attached, you should consult with a competent halachic authority how to proceed. And similarly, one needs to be careful with regard to an animal as well. And there are two large blood vessels in the neck that run alongside the windpipes, through which the blood of the body courses. Okay, so you got to be very careful. This is very interesting, just as so we say that a kosher animal, we mentioned this previously, we say that a kosher animal needs to be slaughtered. How is it slaughtered? It's slaughtered with a very, very sharp knife that has no nick on that knife. It is absolutely smooth as can be. If you look at the nails of a shochet, of a slaughterer, you'll see that he has a long thumbnail. Why does he have a long thumbnail? Because he needs to use that thumbnail to examine the knife. If there's any nick, he'll feel it. You know what's really amazing? Is that the kosher animals are slaughtered in the front of the neck. Okay? Why? Because there are two blood vessels that go through, that supply blood to the brain. By non-kosher animals, they're not configured that way. Hashem created them a different way. They only have one blood vessel going through the front and one going through the back of the neck. So what's the result of that? The result of that is going to be that the animal, the non-kosher animal, if it is slaughtered, will incur a tremendous amount of pain because it's still getting blood supply to the brain, and therefore it's going to cause tremendous pain to the animal. One of the things that we are so cautious of in the Torah is to not cause pain to animals. Tsar Baalei Chaim is a very, very serious thing that we have to take very, very, very incredibly seriously, not to cause pain to animals. And that's all animals. If you have a dog, you have to feed your dog before you feed yourself. We see that you have to avoid all pain from any animal. Avoid causing pain to an animal. Teasing an animal is not either a good thing, right? If you do that little laser thing for the cat and you're teasing it, right? Not a good thing for us to cause pain or anguish to an animal. Okay, halacha number 14, and we'll conclude here, is basar shelo nimlach adayin lo yoniach oso. One should not place meat that has not yet been salted in a spot that sometimes contains salt, right? So you don't place it in a place b'makom shelo fa'amim yesh melach, because it's going to start the extraction process, and then you're going to rinse it. It's not going to v'yesh liyached b'li levasar kli levasar lechud. As we mentioned previously, should designate a specific vessel which is for the meat before being salted. Don't use those vessels for any other purposes. Don't put fruits and vegetables in there. Don't put other food in there. Particularly things that are eaten without being rinsed. Kidam minabasar nidbak bakli, because the blood from the meat will adhere to the sides of the vessels. Umin hakli nidbak bohem, and then from the vessel it's going to go onto the foods that you placed in there. So this is an important thing to remember. There's a proper vessel for the meat before the salting, during the salting, and we'll see soon after the salting as well. Once it's after it's salted, it is already completely kashered. Again, it needs to be rinsed 3 times properly, and then we are ready to move on with cooking the food and making the most delicious kosher food. So any questions on what we mentioned right here? Okay, it's clear? Everybody knows what we're doing? Okay? Yes, go for it, Mark. Yes, so like we mentioned it before, if there is patches of blood or pooling of blood before it's salted, you got to rinse that off first. Okay, and then you have to just make sure that it's not wet, because you're going to put you have to make sure that it's not too dry where it becomes rough, the meat becomes tough, and then salting it is not going to really extract. And you have to make sure it's not too wet where the salt is going to slip off as well. So there's a balance here that's required in order to do this properly. Hashem should bless us all. We should all merit to have always kosher food in front of us, and we should never be in a situation of challenge. I want to share with you one quick story before we move on to our Ask Away number 21, and we'll open the floor to questions. There was an unscrupulous meat provider, okay, one of these I don't want to call it, it's not a slaughterhouse because he didn't actually do it, but he, one of these vendors, one of these kosher supermarkets in New York, in Muncie, where I lived and where I grew up, and there was this unscrupulous store owner who would, at first he gained trust of the community, and then what he would do was he would go and pick up his meat order. He'd go pick it up. What would he do? He would have non-kosher meat delivered to a warehouse. He would unpackage and repackage that chicken and meat with a kosher wrapping, and bring it to his store and sell it as if it was kosher. And this was a tragedy for our community. Tragedy. I can tell you that my mother, every week, my mother would send me to the rabbi in the community. I remember Rabbi Horowitz was a very, very special, pious old Jew. He was just such a sweet man. And my mother, every time I'd come home for Shabbos, my mother would say, I have a piece of chicken for you to bring to Rabbi Horowitz to check if it's kosher. And every week he would give me the same answer. Every week he would tell me, Oy, you can tell your mother it's okay. She doesn't need to send me the chickens. It's the way they cut up the chickens in the machine, because they put the chicken in the machine and it cuts off all the different parts. Sometimes it would break a bone. Now, my mother, when she was cleaning the chicken, she would look and she'd see a broken bone. It must be it was a non-kosher chicken. So that's why she would send me. And every time he would say it's okay and send it back. I don't know if that was the same chicken that this guy was, because my mother used to buy her chickens from this guy. I found out about it when my wife and I were living in Israel. We were a young couple, and we woke up in the morning and we see the news of this scandal that happened with this kosher butcher shop in Muncie. And we were like, I don't believe it. That's where my mother buys her chicken from. And I called my mother. It was really, really late at night. It was like probably 2 or 3 in the morning in New York. And my mother was up, and she picked up the phone. I said, what are you doing up? I said, I just read the story. This is crazy. This is terrible. She said, yeah, I just finished koshering the entire kitchen. My mother didn't wait, even though the rabbi said it wasn't necessary. But my mother was like not taking any chances. My mother koshered the entire kitchen. Every single pot, every single pan, every single knife, every single fork. Every single surface that chicken or meat may have touched was koshered. Right? You have to be so careful to ensure that we're buying our chicken and our meat from this person was excommunicated from the community, from the entire community. There was a bezdin, a Jewish court that was assembled, and they ruled that he was someone who needed to be completely ostracized from the community. And indeed he was. But this was a terrible scandal, and it puts a very bad flavor in our mouth from like. It also happens to be that the rabbi who was overseeing the kashruts for this facility completely disbanded his whole kashrus agency. He said this was a flaw that he brought upon the community, that he doesn't want to take that responsibility ever again. Clearly, he said about himself that he was unqualified for this and never did it again, and closed his whole kashrus supervision. This is a big thing. It's not the only time it's happened. It's happened some other time, but in a different way. There was a restaurant that was serving non-kosher food, non-kosher chicken and meat. They were getting it in through the back door, and for whatever reason, they would do it in a time that the mashgiach was on a lunch break or something like that, and they knew his schedule, which is why a mashgiach, someone who's a supervisor in a restaurant, should not have a steady schedule. He should come and go at a time that they're not ready, where they're like, oh, the surprise visit, Generally, a meat restaurant will have a steady mashgiach there at all times. Anything that walks in the door is being inspected to ensure that it has the proper certification, the proper symbol, and the proper seal that it's not that it hasn't been tampered with. All right, my dear friends, this concludes part 1 of the laws of salting. We will resume now with our Ask Away number 21. My dear friends, ask away.
You've been listening to Rabbi Aryeh Wolbe on a podcast produced by Torch, the Torah Outreach Resource Center of Houston. Please help sponsor an episode so we can continue to produce more quality Jewish content for our listeners around the globe. please visit torchweb.org to donate and partner with us on this incredible endeavor.